Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the pros and cons of the 4-1-4-1 Mikel Arteta deployed in Arsenal's 0-0 draw against Burnley. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Arsenal's attacking shape, then we'll shift to the positioning of Smith Rowe and Odegaard, and lastly we'll focus on Arsenal's second half positional tweaks. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Burnley in a 4-4-2 and Arsenal starting in a 4-1-4-1. It was logical for Arsenal to start in this system given the fact that we did expect Burnley to, for the most part, drop off into two banks of four. So this ensures that they're able to be a bit more offensive as Burnley drop into a low block. They have Odegaard and Smith Rowe operating as the shuttlers ahead of Lokonga, and that gives them three ball-playing midfielders in that zone that Arteta was expecting to dictate the tempo of the game. You have Saka and Martinelli out in the wider areas, and then Lacazette looking to drop off deeper to serve as an outlet between the lines and to encourage Saka and Martinelli to break in behind. Essentially, when you look at this shape, you're expecting Arsenal to be more of a 4-1-5 in attack with Odegaard and Smith Rowe joining Lacazette in those central areas, and then Martinelli and Saka hugging the touchline to provide the width and stretch out this narrow Burnley two banks of four. At times, you would expect it to potentially be a 3-1-6 because if Martinelli shifts into that gap between Tarkowski and Roberts, that gives Tierney the license to push forward, and White for the most part would stick in a narrow position to form a back three. However, Arsenal did encounter issues in the early stages of that game due to the fact that Burnley were looking to disrupt them from building attacks out of the back. You had Rodriguez and Vidra in between Lokonga, but they took turns stepping towards the center backs and ensuring that there was always one player on Lokonga so that he couldn't get on the ball. If that wasn't the case, you would see Rodriguez blocking off the passing lane into Lokonga to ensure that Vidra could come back, or vice versa, with Vidra stepping towards Gabriel, and then you could have Rodriguez stepping towards Holding but then retreating into his position if Vidra blocks off the passing lane into Lokonga. That leaves McNeil and Lennon to step out towards White and Tierney, and that's where you end up seeing the 3v2 in that midfield zone if Lacazette drops off deeper. You would need me or Tarkowski to step towards him, but there were occasions where Burnley ended up seeing McNeil stepping towards White, Brownhill shifting towards Odegaard, and then you would see Westwood pick up Lacazette and they'd have Lennon tucking in centrally to deal with Smith Rowe. This was simply down to the positioning of Odegaard and Smith Rowe. They were looking to pick up the ball in the gaps between McNeil and Brownhill and Westwood and Lennon, and they were often looking to check in towards the ball to receive it. That means that they are receiving the ball with their back to goal and it invites pressure towards them. With Lokonga sitting in between Rodriguez and Vidra, that was also an issue for Arsenal because he wasn't looking to vary his movement, and this is why it's no surprise that Arsenal are linked with Artur Melo. In these situations, Artur Melo would look to drop in between the center backs or shift into an inside right or left position away from the Burnley front two to get on the ball, and it also helps encourage the fullbacks forward. But in those situations, Artur Melo is able to get on the ball, attract pressure, and then evade that pressure to help his side push forward as he retains possession. Here, for the most part, Lokonga sat in between those two central forwards and didn't look to vary his movement, and that allowed Burnley to remain in their shape due to the fact that he was closed out of the game. So with Odegaard and Smith Rowe dropping into those gaps, that ensured that Burnley could stay narrow and Arsenal couldn't play through that central zone. And then even with Lacazette dropping in between Brownhill and Westwood, this put a lot of onus on the center backs to help Arsenal bypass that initial front six. Ultimately, in those situations, even if we witness Odegaard or Smith Rowe pushing into advanced positions beyond their markers into the Peters-Me gap or the Tarkowski-Roberts gap, one of the center backs could step towards them due to the fact that Lacazette was looking to receive the ball between the lines. Whether it be me stepping towards Odegaard or Tarkowski stepping towards Smith Rowe, because Lacazette was dropping into those central areas and not occupying the two center backs, that allowed the Burnley center backs the freedom to step towards Odegaard or Smith Rowe if need be. Ultimately, in these situations, you needed varied movement from Odegaard and Smith Rowe to bypass the Burnley front six. Whether that be Odegaard or Smith Rowe dropping ahead of the midfield bank and to the outside of the forwards to get on the ball facing the midfield bank. In this example, you witness Odegaard picking up the ball in his own half ahead of the Burnley midfield bank, and as that play develops, he bypasses Rodriguez's pressure by combining with with Lokonga, and that guides him in towards the Burnley half where he's able to play a reverse no-look pass between Lennon and Westwood for Smith Rowe in a pocket of space. Smith Rowe anticipates Mee's pressure, and what he does well here is that he plays a first-time ball into the path of Tierney, and that helps Arsenal progress their play and bypass the Burnley pressure. Or they could shift out into the wider areas when McNeil or Lennon were stepping towards Tierney to get on the ball, or even if they weren't getting on the ball, they were attracting attention from those wider players, and that movement would stretch out the Burnley midfield bank and create space for the wide players or Lacazette to drop in to receive the ball. Here we witness Tierney carrying the ball into Burnley's half as Smith Rowe's positioning pulls away Lennon, and what he sees ahead of him is Lacazette dropping into the Brownhill-Westwood gap. When Tierney looks to play the ball into Lacazette, that's where you end up seeing Lacazette dropping off the ball into the path of Lokonga, who pushed forward and broke away from Rodriguez and Vidra, and now that creates the possibility for Lacazette and Lokonga to play the ball around Brownhill, and that's going to set Lacazette free to break at the back line, or Lokonga could slide the ball into Odegaard free between the lines. He ends up playing the ball into Lacazette, and as he drags away McNeil, you can see that he has a free lane to make a run, and from this position he should be trying to slide the ball into Odegaard, who could break free on goal, but with Mee stepping forward, he breaks the challenge from the center back, and he's placed in a legitimate shooting position with Peters looking to step towards him, but from there Lacazette scuffs his effort wide of the net. Later on, we witness White sliding the ball across McNeil for Odegaard shifting laterally towards the touchline and dragging away Brownhill, and when Odegaard does receive the ball from White, he takes a touch in towards his own half, drags away two Burnley players, and then looks to square it into the path of Lokonga, who's just ahead of Rodriguez. When Lokonga receives Odegaard's pass, that's where he's looking to step forward, but he locates Lacazette towards the left of Westwood in a pocket of space, and before Rodriguez could step in towards him, he plays a forward pass into the path of Lacazette and focus on Odegaard's movement. Lacazette's able to hold off Westwood, and that's where he locates Odegaard making a run off Brownhill to break into Burnley's half. Odegaard ends up bypassing Westwood, who does put in a foot for a challenge, and that's where you could see Smith Rowe making a run towards the back four as he runs off Lennon, who's tucked in narrow. As that play develops, you witness Lennon shifting central, but Odegaard's now able to slide the ball into the path of Martinelli as Smith Rowe's made a forward run to take away the center backs. This places Martinelli in an ideal position ahead of Roberts, and you can see Tierney making an overlapping run as Tarkowski shifts across to make it 1v2. At the back post, you also end up seeing Arsenal in a 3v2, so Martinelli looks to play an overlapping pass into the path of Tierney, and from this position he should be connecting with one of his teammates breaking free at the back post, as Martinelli's pass has taken out three Burnley players out of the game. However, unfortunately for Arsenal fans, Tierney's cross is poor and Mee is able to clear the lines. The only other alternative for Arsenal in those situations would be to have Smith Rowe or Odegaard shifting to the opposite side of the pitch to create overloads, and then that would be an outlet for Arsenal to bypass that initial press. In this example, you see Smith Rowe receiving the ball from Saka and looking to play it first time into the path of Odegaard, who's just slightly behind him. When Odegaard does receive the ball, he's free in a pocket of space, and as Rodriguez looks to step towards him, he locates Lacazette, dropping off Tarkowski, and slides the ball across Westwood for Lacazette. Although Lacazette's pass is poor, it bounces into the path of Odegaard, continuing his movement into the final third, and from there, because Smith Rowe's shifted towards that right channel, he clips the ball over the defender into the path of Smith Rowe, who's now free to break towards goal in right half space, but as he carries the ball forward, he drags away Tarkowski, and that creates a lane for the pullback across Westwood and Tarkowski for Odegaard free at the edge of the box. But when Odegaard receives the ball, he has to take a first touch, and from there he's in a legitimate shooting position where he tests Nick Pope, but he's unable to beat the keeper and the game remains scoreless. Meanwhile, out in the wider areas, because those central midfielders couldn't get on the ball on a consistent basis, Arsenal were relying on the center backs to build out of the back. And what we witnessed throughout the game was that Tierney, Gabriel, and White were capable of playing diagonal switches out to Saka and Martinelli to place them in 1v1s as they look to break in behind or hold the touchline. Lokonga was also capable of that on the rare occasion that he received the ball away from Vidra and Rodriguez, but it was Holding in particular who struggled to play those balls out into the wider areas or over the top, and that put more onus on Burnley to ensure that he had the freedom to carry the ball forward, knowing that he wasn't comfortable or capable of playing those passes. However, even in those situations when Saka and Martinelli received the ball out in the wider areas, for the most part you witness McNeil and Lennon dropping off deeper to make it a 1v2 with either of the center backs or the central midfielders shifting across for cover. And while Martinelli never looks certain whether to run at Roberts or carry the ball towards the byline, what you can say in his defense is that when he received the ball in those zones, because Lacazette was dropping off deeper, there was often no support in the penalty area for Martinelli to play the ball into. But in the second half, what we ended up seeing was that they were more of a 4-1-5, and that's where we consistently witnessed Odegaard and Smith Rowe adopting positions in the final third between the lines and not looking to receive the ball in those gaps between the wide player and the central midfielder. So you had Saka and Martinelli hugging the touchline, Odegaard and Smith Rowe looking to receive the ball between the lines, and now you have to ask yourself how Arsenal would get the ball to the midfield shuttlers or their front three. This put more onus on Arsenal to play a bit more direct, and while they were able to get switches out to Saka and Martinelli, Arsenal still encountered issues getting those players into 1v1s on a consistent basis to run at Peters and Roberts. And while there were occasions where we witnessed Smith Rowe and Odegaard dropping off deeper to get on the ball, Arsenal's main threat in that second half stemmed down the left-hand side. They were dragging Lennon and Roberts towards the touchline, and then you were seeing Smith Rowe making runs off Westwood in towards the left channel. That would force Tarkowski to shift across to provide cover, but he struggled out in those wider zones against Smith Rowe. In this example, you witnessed Tierney looking to slide the ball across Lennon towards Martinelli, pulling away Roberts, and focus on Smith Rowe's run in towards the Roberts-Tarkowski gap off Westwood. When Martinelli receives the ball, you can see that he pulls away the right back, and that's where you see Westwood not tracking the movement of Smith Rowe as he's ball watching to ensure that he could provide cover for Roberts if Martinelli beats him. Martinelli ends up sliding the ball across Roberts, and you could see that Smith Rowe receives the ball freely in the left channel, and Tarkowski doesn't shift across to provide cover as Lacazette's making a run towards the box, and now Westwood has to cover. That's where you see Smith Rowe carrying the ball in left half space towards the penalty area, and with Roberts and Westwood shifting over, this is an ideal opportunity for Smith Rowe to pull the ball back to Martinelli, who's running off Lennon and calling for the ball. However, he opts to carry the ball towards goal, and from that position you could see that he's closed out by 4 Burnley players, and rather than placing Martinelli in a legitimate shooting position, he delivers a low cross towards goal that Westwood cuts out for a corner. Shortly after that, it's Gabriel looking to slide the ball out towards Tierney, and you could see Martinelli dropping into his own half and Smith Rowe already making a run off Westwood. When Tierney does receive the ball, you could see that Martinelli's pulling out Roberts, and that creates a large gap for Smith Rowe to continue his movement in towards the left channel, and you can see that Westwood isn't bothered with tracking his movement. That's when you end up seeing Smith Rowe making that run in beyond Roberts, who's expecting Tierney to play the pass into Martinelli, but Tierney disguises a long ball in towards the left channel behind the right back, and that pulls out Tarkowski, who has to now shift across to close down Smith Rowe. From this position, you're expecting Tarkowski to force Smith Rowe wide, but Smith Rowe does a very good job of getting the ball across Tarkowski with his first touch, and from this position you could see that there are no Arsenal players breaking in towards the penalty area, so Smith Rowe continues to carry the ball in towards left half space, and from there he locates Lacazette making the run towards the 6-yard area, but Mee does well not to drop towards that 6-yard box, and he sticks with Lacazette, so when that pullback is played, it gives Mee an opportunity to make a last-ditch tackle to force Lacazette into a tough first-time effort, and although he does have an open goal and should be scoring, Mee's pressure forces him wide. But even though Smith Rowe arguably created Arsenal's best chance of the game, he was replaced by Nketiah, who adopted a similar position despite Arsenal playing with 2 attacking players. Nketiah was sitting in that gap just in beyond Westwood, and as that game developed, he also utilized his pace and his strength to break into space down that right channel, whether it be combining with Lacazette or breaking off Roberts into left half space to drag out Tarkowski. But similar to Smith Rowe, when he got into those positions, he failed to find the final pass to help Arsenal claim all 3 points. Minutes later, it's Tierney on the ball pulling away Goodmanson and Martinelli dragging Roberts towards the touchline. That's where you see Nketiah calling for the ball in between the Roberts-Tarkowski gap. And what ends up happening is that Goodmanson doesn't apply tight pressure towards Tierney. And with Roberts stepping towards Martinelli close, that results in Tierney clipping the ball over Roberts for Nketiah looking to make a run in towards the left channel. As you can see, Tarkowski does a very good job of tracking Nketiah into that zone, but Nketiah doesn't get a first touch on the ball and it ends up bouncing across him, and that results in him using his pace and his strength to get the better of Tarkowski to run goal side. But you could see that Roberts and me are dropping back to provide cover, because as that play develops, Nketiah is unable to control the ball into a shooting position, and that results in Roberts tracking back to make a last-ditch tackle to halt the attack for a corner. So as you can see, in a game where Arsenal created enough chances to win, this performance vividly highlighted the areas that Arteta and the board need to bolster in the next few days to improve their chances of finishing in the top 4.